Okay, so today I feel like is another exciting thing about the Nintendo Switch 2 because this shows the possibility of what this system is going to be and the future of first-party games for the Switch 2. Today we're going back and talking about the power of this system because a lot of things are being reported about the system. Digital Foundry has done their examination of the system after reviewing footage, and we have things to compare to, things to talk about, an article talking about something crazy regarding Mario Kart and what it could mean for future games. We have a lot of exciting things to talk about when it comes to the power of the Nintendo Switch 2. But before we jump into that, please make sure that you are backslashing that subscribe button, as we're so close to 16,000 subscribers, as we have been uploading Switch 2 videos every single day. In fact, I almost did something completely different today, but then I was like, whoa, this is big. I wasn't expecting me doing another Switch 2 big performance video, but here we are. We're talking about performance and power. And this time I feel like it is very, very positive. But without further ado, let's go and get started into the video. Let's first talk about Mario Kart. Mario Kart World is reportedly getting a 120 frames per second mode on the Nintendo Switch 2. Reported by Engadget. They have made a whole article talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, and one of the things they talked about was Mario Kart World. And something that they said in the article is they played at 120 frames per second mode of Mario Kart World. Now, this is a mode that has not been officially announced, and people are wondering if this is a mistake of some sort. I'm not really sure, and I'm sure that's the same demo that everyone's been playing at the Nintendo Switch 2 Experience mode. I don't know if they played this mode or they were told this mode was coming, but as of all the footage we have seen out there for Mario Kart World, there's been nothing indicating of 120 frames per second. However, this would not be surprising if this is something Nintendo is going to do. Obviously, Mario Kart World is Nintendo's big Switch 2 game, potentially for the whole year. I mean, they're pricing it at $80. So Nintendo is very confident into this game. They're doing so many new things with this game. And one of the things that was heavily promoted with the Nintendo Switch 2 at that announcement video was its power, its screen, the 1080p screen, and of course its games. And one of the games that was promoted with it was one of the Nintendo Switch 2 editions, which was Meteoroid Prime 4. Can you guess what was the big marketing that they used for buying the Switch 2 edition? 120 frames per second. This has been a big selling point, and they've even talked about how handheld mode can play that game at 120 frames per second. I bring this up because it really seems like there's a good possibility that Nintendo could be going towards a market where a lot of their first-party games are going to be at 120 frames per second mode with these performance modes. Because as of right now, Mario Kart has not had an official announcement, but they're probably going to have some sort of performance mode, as this is something that we're seeing with a lot of upcoming third-party Switch 2 games, and we're seeing it with Prime 4, for example. I am sure we're going to see more of this, and I think Nintendo is going to heavily market into this because the way I see it, a lot of people in today's age does not have the proper technology to actually utilize 120 frames per second. So things like the PS5, there were games out there that had that option towards when the PS5 first released, but no one had the technology to actually properly utilize that. But Nintendo is giving you a handheld device that can already handle 120 frames per second. So we're actually going to start seeing this be an option that people use, because back then people were working on it and didn't use it because they didn't have the right technology for it. Because from my understanding, I'm not too much of a tech guy when it comes to this type of stuff, but I believe monitors for 120 frames per second is pretty expensive, and same thing with TVs. You gotta have the right hertz for all of this, and everyone just does not have that. I think this is a very exciting thing that Nintendo is going to start doing, and I think in that Mario Kart Direct that is happening next Thursday, well actually, I guess it's this Thursday because we're already past Thursday, and the next Thursday would be Mario Kart. So I guess this Thursday is where I think they're going to officially announce performance mode, where you can do 120 frames per second on handheld and of course TV mode. I think this is a big move from Nintendo and something that could really benefit Nintendo in a way that not enough people are doing, which is utilizing 120 frames per second. I'm curious to see more about how 120 frames per second is going to work and what power Nintendo is using here. I question if there's potential AI usage used for this, because I definitely think when it comes to the power of the system, AI is being used, but we can discuss that another day. Speaking of power, let's talk about Digital Foundry. Digital Foundry is reporting that the Nintendo Switch 2 is on par with a based PlayStation 4. To be completely honest with y'all, I don't believe this to be the case. Digital Foundry is a great place for all this type of stuff, but there have been times with the Switch 2 that they were wrong. In fact, I believe they were suggesting that the 1080p screen that is being utilized for this Switch 2 was not going to be something that was possible. I forgot the correct wording that they used here, but I'm pretty sure they said with their knowledge that the power of the Switch 2 was just not going to have a 1080p screen, and that's obviously not the case with handheld. We have a 1080p screen. I think something with like the power of the GPU being impossible or something like that. I feel like Digital Foundry is wrong here because there's so many third-party games that you can compare this to at its power. One of the popular things is Street Fighter 6. People have been doing graphic comparisons to the PS4 Pro model, Xbox Series S, and Switch 2 versions of Street Fighter 6. And the Switch 2 looks almost identical, if not maybe better when it comes to this. I know with Switch 2, people were comparing it to Street Fighter 6 on PS4 Pro, and it seemed like Switch 2 was beating that, and it looked pretty much the same thing with Series S. Not to mention, I saw people comparing Elden Ring to the Switch 2 with the PS4. And these comparisons show that the Switch 2 is a very powerful system. Not to mention Cyberpunk 2077. I feel like that game is a game that wasn't exactly the greatest on PS4 and Xbox One from a performance standpoint. I'm going by when the system released initially. I don't know if they updated last gen models of Cyberpunk, but that game seemed to really have issues. But in general, I know that was a very high demanding game, but we have seen how beautiful Cyberpunk 2077 is running on this system. Not to mention, and I think this is something that no one is really talking about much with the Nintendo Switch 2, is that the footage that we have seen with Cyberpunk 2077, it is a 7-week build of the game. Look at how incredible Cyberpunk is. I mean, the only time that you could truly tell that you're playing a different system is probably when you're looking at the hair from the footage that I have seen. But the fact that they can do this in 7 weeks makes me wonder what other crazy improvements we could see with third-party games heading into the Nintendo Switch 2, especially considering it is Cyberpunk. And I did a video on the performance of this, and the Nintendo Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk is going to have the DLC. The PS4 Pro model of Cyberpunk could not get the DLC because of performance issues, but the Switch 2 can get it. So I feel like the fact that people are making these comparisons that the Switch 2 is just as powerful as a PS4 is just wrong. You are wrong. Look at the stuff that is happening on the Switch 2. Maybe the Switch 2 is just easy to develop for and it can actually handle these things. I'm not really sure. I'm not a technology person when it comes to performances and stuff, but I am going based off the fact that we are seeing all of these games that should not be possible due to the PS4 power, but we're seeing it happen on Switch 2 with ease. Another thing that I want to talk about with Digital Foundry is they're talking about how the Star Wars Outlaws port that is coming to the Switch 2 is basically impossible and going to be very interesting to see how Ubisoft handles this. Once again, I'm jumping back into Cyberpunk with how the dev build for that game was 7 weeks. All the footage that you've seen from Switch 2 experience was from a 7-week build of the game. And the fact that we're seeing Star Wars Outlaws as a game on the Switch 2, I think once again shows the type of power of this system. Because if it was a based model PS4 game, this game would have already existed on PS4 and Xbox One. Star Wars Outlaws was only on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. Here it is, coming to the Switch 2. And that is a big title from Ubisoft to be putting onto the Switch 2. Now, I am going to throw this out there. That way, if this does happen, we can look back on this video. Ubisoft does have a track record of announcing things for a system that is kind of impossible to be put onto a system. I look back at the Nintendo Switch 1 presentation, and there was one giant third-party game announcement that Ubisoft put in their sizzle reel, kind of like how this sizzle reel happened for the Switch 2, and that game was Steep. Steep was supposed to come out to the Nintendo Switch later that year, then it got delayed into 2018, and then somebody asked the Steep Twitter account, where is this game? And you got the official cancellation by a reply to the Steep Twitter account. That is how they announced that the Switch version was canceled. They canceled it in early 2018 due to power issues with the system, which is kind of crazy that you had a Switch game get canceled that early into the life cycle from a power issue. Very interesting. I'm very curious to see how that game actually ran on Switch, because that's kind of like a giant mystery. One of the biggest canceled Switch games, at least that we know about. There's a lot of crazy third-party games that got canceled, but that one was a pretty big one. And I mean, I'm guessing it's possible that if this game is truly an impossible build that should not be able to be possible for Switch 2, we could see history repeat itself, or we could not be seeing that, and we're seeing a very powerful Switch 2 system have all the capability of these third-party games and first party. Me personally, I go back to the 120 frames per second and think, what other games could utilize this from a first party perspective? Because I don't think many third parties are gonna be utilizing this. But hey, I could be wrong. Maybe that From Software game is gonna utilize 120 frames per second. Was it Dusk Blood? Was that what it was called? Could be utilizing that. Who knows? Maybe even Pokemon Legends ZA. Although, to be honest with you, I don't think Game Freak even knows how to make a 60 frames per second locked game. I think the possibilities of this is pretty much infinite, and I feel like this is the first time that Nintendo has been at a part where the power of a system is pretty on par with stuff. Like I said, PS5, Series X, it's gonna be more powerful, but this system feels, I wouldn't say close, but very powerful, and we're gonna be getting big games and very unexpected third-party support for the next 5 to 6 years. I think there's gonna be crazy things done with this system and exciting things that are going to be considered impossible, and I think by the time this system releases and we see these games in our hands, we're going to be saying ourselves, wow, maybe anything is possible for this system. As I've said many times with the Switch 1, that third-party games can run on this system. They just gotta make advanced versions that was made only for the Switch, not be a direct build from the PS4, Xbox One, PS5, that type of stuff. Maybe that's what we're seeing with the Switch too. Maybe that's why Cyberpunk's doing so well, is because they're making a Switch build version of the game. I think the possibilities are infinite with this, not to mention, if rumors are true, third-party developers are just now starting to get dev kits for this system, because not everyone got a dev kit because Nintendo was afraid of the system being leaked out, which that did not work very well in their favor. But I am kind of believing that rumor now, just due to the fact that this Cyberpunk build is a 7-week build. Like, this was something that they worked on 7 weeks ago. That's around the time that the Switch 2 was officially announced. So I think you're going to see some crazy third-party game announcements in the next few months. Either way, I think this is an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan. Me personally, and I know this is a crazy hot take, I feel like when you look at things like the Steam Deck, see the type of power it has, the type of value it offers, and then you look at the Switch 2 pricing, looking like it's going to be more powerful than the Steam Deck that we have out there right now, I think $450 is a very fair price tag. I just think when it comes to game prices, that is when Nintendo needs to look at themselves and really circle back and figure out if they're doing the right thing here, because that's pretty high. But I want to hear what you guys have to say about the power of the Switch 2. What do you think? How do you feel about what we're seeing here? Because me personally, I think this is super exciting. I think the possibilities of 120 frames per second with first-party games is going to be crazy. I think if Mario Kart has that 120 frames per second option, that is going to be phenomenal. Meteoroid at 120 frames sounds incredible. And once again, you're going to have a device, if you don't have the right TV, the right hertz, the right monitor, all that stuff, you're going to have that device that is supposed to have 120 frames right then and there where you're going to be noticing it. I'm curious though if there's somehow any AI being used for the frames, but that's a story for another day. I want to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments down below. Guys, make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Discord, Instagram, all that good stuff, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace. Hey Google, what time is it?
12:06 a.m.
12:06.